All right. Well, thank you for joining. Today we're talking about virtual instruments. We're infrastructure performance management. And so that's what I'm going to be covering for the next 30 minutes. Usually I spend about an hour going through this, so you get the fast-forwarded version. So, which, you know, most of us, I like to gauge the audience though. How many of us are, you know, IT, kind of in the weeds guys, and who would be like an infrastructure manager or above? I'm trying to understand. So who's our like IT guys who are in the weeds on the screens every day? All right. And who's our guys maybe a little higher up that looks at different? Because you guys care. So the funny thing is these two groups, you guys care about different stuff. A lot of times I talk to the IT guys and they're like, man, this is awesome. This is going to change my life. I got to go tell my boss, hey boss, I just found this new troubleshooting tool. And then a lot of times what happens is that the manager's like, look, you got a bunch of tools that we don't get a lot of value out of. And in a lot of cases, what IT managers, NOC folks care about, right, is about, you know, not only delivering great service, but how does it relate to the applications, right, that are paying for the infrastructure? The application teams are the guys doing it. Or am I utilizing my assets? You know how much of a pain it is coming up? Well, find all the lost LUNs. How am I utilizing VM processor? How am I utilizing my SAN ports? Am I really getting the best? You know, how can I make this easy so I can optimize my environment, save some money, but yet deliver the best performance possible? Because before I came to virtual instruments, those two things were never in the same sentence together, right? Save money, run faster, but I do that every day with this product. Yes, sir, you have a question?
Oh, well, no, I was just...
You were just saying yes?
Well, I was agreeing in the space of, yes, my job is to, make sure to get value out of what we currently have, but the hard thing with most products is having the reporting that I can hand my boss that goes, that he can show his higher-ups that goes, yes, we're actually getting the value out of what we just bought.
Right. And be able to relate that, you know, and the thing is the middle ground where IT managers, VPs of ITs, they have to be able to relate to your application customers. Your application customers don't care that, you know, this disk is XYZ. What they care about is what is the response time of my application and all the millions of conversations that make this thing up. And what pieces of infrastructure does my application run on? How do you map that all out? Those are the questions and the problems we're solving for customers. Now, how do I do it? So, because obviously today, we're all pretty technical. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. But right, our infrastructure is mostly converged. We're doing a lot more convergence. Everything's sharing everything. We got a SAN that's running some giant VM platform. Maybe you have two. Maybe you got IBM P Series, you got Windows. You know, maybe you got one of those. Maybe you have multiple. But how do I do the little pointer here? Yeah. So you know, the thing is now I'm sharing a lot more stuff. I can deploy a server very fast, right? I can get some software to automatically deploy resources. So has the monitoring capability of your infrastructure kept up with the speed at which you can deploy infrastructure? And the answer we're hearing is no. The monitoring tools today are very silo specific. I got a tool for 3PAR. I got a tool for VMware. I got a tool for IBM P Series. I got a tool basically for each silo. So what ends up happening is right, we get in a situation where there's a problem. You get a bunch of people in a room, and what do we all do? We look in our silo and say, it's not me. We don't have the ability to correlate maybe a SCSI error that's happening on the array to, wrong button, doggone it. I can't relate maybe SCSI errors I'm seeing here coming off the storage port to a VAI misconfiguration on the VMware server because I can't see both. Today's world, having a silo-specific performance monitoring platform is not very helpful. It will not allow you to get to root cause. You have to do it a new way. And so we started from the ground up figuring out how to monitor these next generation data centers. And by the way, now we got what? Now we get even more problems with like AWS. We have the hyper-converged stuff like that EMC's coming out with. What are those 2 new products, Greg? It's Scale.io and EMC's other product. A lot of those where it's now is bundled in. So we're also working at keeping up with that technology also. Being able to relate my internal infrastructure and how it's going to perform out in the cloud too. That's going to be an important thing to be able to understand because you used to run it on the internal infrastructure. How does the performance now when I move it out? Am I in one platform to be able to monitor that? That's the types of things we're working on today. So the reality is it's all in one big blob usually, and it's very hard to figure out who's doing what. So how do I solve the problem? Well, I got to have monitoring, like I said in the last slide, over all the stacks. I got to have visibility into each one of them. Even if one of those stacks might not be your primary job responsibility, I'm sure you have a NOC. You have somebody that relates to the application, folks, that says, is any piece of the infrastructure slowing down this application? Because that's what I care about. I don't care what your job is, right? I bought money on this infrastructure. I need it performing well. So I got to have the full stack. I got to be highly granular. So I hear real time all the time from multiple monitoring vendors. How about I gather every single I/O? And really, when we start relating all flash arrays that are doing 1 million IOPS a second, 100,000 IOPS a second, how does a 5-minute average tell you anything? How do you solve a problem with that? And then, what are the low-level metrics around that performance? What are the really low-level metrics that typically you got to call a vendor in to look at? How is that's what's actually slowing the performance down. What if you could have that data, see end-to-end performance of every I/O and all the heuristics around what's causing the slowness at your fingertips all the time? And no, it doesn't cost $1 billion, and you don't need another SAN to store the data, luckily. Other things we need on that, right, is ability to bring in data from both machine and wire information. So how do I gather every I/O and don't slow the infrastructure down? Well, I have a proprietary method of gathering it right off the wire in a out-of-band fashion, and I'll show that in a little bit. Be able to imagine the amount of IOPS I got to be able to ingest and the type of database I have to have. But, for once and again, right, cross-silo correlation and analytic platform laid over. If I'm gathering every I/O, I now have to have a computer kind of analyzing the data for me to find the pieces, the needles in the haystack. Or like most of my customers say, is your analytics remove all the hay so all I see are the needles. And that's the important part, right? Have the machine do the analysis for us so that we can comprehend a lot of data and not miss the important stuff. We still have to do analysis, but the thing is finding the bad stuff. So how do we do that today? So we have a virtual wisdom platform appliance. That's our database, and its ability to also gather data. It has some what we call software probes. Because remember, I don't install anything onto your stack. If I'm installing software in here, what am I going to end up doing to it? Slowing it down. So I talk to known APIs, like from VMware, I talk to vCenter API. From the fiber channel switch environment, I talk to their SNMP provider. But the beauty of every I/O is our monitoring probe. So we have a protocol analyzer for fiber channel and one for Ethernet. And that's really how I gather the data at every I/O. I have something called a path splitter in here. That's essentially what happens when you shoot a laser through a prism. It splits it. So if I could literally put a prism in, does a prism break? As long as you don't get it dirty, right? You don't hit it with a sledgehammer. I can insert that into my path between the storage and the switch, and now I can get a third leg of that laser. And if I have a device that understands the protocol and then can break it apart and create statistics off of it and look at all the really low-level metrics that's actually slowing it down, now I have something. So this is a scalable platform. It can work. I got customers that have a 100-bed hospital. He's got 2 VNXs. He says the best money he ever spent on this. And I have customers like, you know, very large insurance companies in Illinois. It's in central Illinois. So you can get the gist, you know, of the type of customer. So we small to gigantic. And they obviously, you know, see value in different areas of that. Now, with that data, in the data in our database, now we have an analytics platform laid over top and a visualization system to allow you to comprehend and look at that data. Now, for all the technical folks in the crowd, I am going to do a deep dive on the architecture because you're probably very much unsatisfied right now. But I will do that at the end. So what am I doing here with this platform, right? I'm able to give you maximum availability. I'm able to show your SLA on every I/O. So how are you meeting your SLA to your end users? Highest application performance, optimizing how the hosts communicate with storage and how the storage communicates to the hosts, how VMs communicate, how they're allocated. We look into all those areas to give you the best performance possible and at the lowest cost of infrastructure. And here we have the ability, if I look at every I/O, I can tell you every LUN that's only been accessed a couple times this month. I can tell you all the VMs that have too many CPUs hitting it, deployed, right? And if you're having CPU contention issues in the VM environment. Those are 2 metrics you have to layer over because a lot of times you go to a customer and say, I had this customer, he's got 60,000 VMs, and I said about 10,000 of them have way too much processor. They never hit 35%. And the guy said, so what? And I said, well, SQL loves to charge you by processor, don't they? And I said, so software costs alone would just be a massive savings. Then I said, let's look at CPU ready on your VM environment. If it's going above 5%, you're actually causing slowness just because and why do we deploy a VM with 8 processors? Because somebody read in a white paper and the application vendor said you got to do it. And what we do is we monitor that, help you back that down, decrease the amount of contention going on in the environment, and then lay out the VMs in a way that's not going to cause a bunch of vMotions and things like that. How many storage ports are you utilizing in your environment? I can see maximum utilization. Make sure you are optimized across every one. Instead of doing like maybe a round robin type of distribution, maybe I start deploying storage based on utilization of every storage port and storage array. And in a lot of cases, I've had customers cut their storage ports in half. We've done a queue depth optimization and cut their response time from 50 milliseconds down to 8. Now, that was all on spinning disk. That was before they went to all flash. They thought they needed to buy all flash to fix the problem. Ended up saving them about $300,000. That's a small, mid-sized customer. So, right, the other part of our platform, well, here's an example of what's going on, how we would solve an issue. So, we got a noisy neighbor type issue where in this particular example, I got a database that's getting some bad performance. So with VI and our analytics platform, we were able to isolate in the environment another host sharing the same storage array, doing a backup at the exact same time this database was trying to run its job. So our analytics platform, by looking at the data flow and using our event advisor, I said, show me anybody else running the same type of magnitude at the same time. And it helped me show this other server here doing this backup. And we were able to reschedule the backup outside the batch window for the ERP system, and their performance came back. So something that was like a needle in a haystack, they were messing around for about 4 or 5 months. We were able to show them in about 4 or 5 hours. So the other thing is being able to have a monitoring system come up with problems in your environment and things you need to solve. Well, then, okay, so like that customer I told about, I did a queue depth optimization. How many of the storage guys in the room are going to be able to go to the server guy and say, hey, we need to optimize all the queue depths because this VI thing said so? Right? You're not the only person. That happens every time. So what we have is something called load dynamics. It's the ability to take a workload and identically recreate it just in that green box. So I put this green box in. I can import the workload I saw from the SQL box or whatever server into Workload Wisdom. It will duplicate it identically. It'll look at the read-write mix, how the IOs are occurring, the write IO mix, reads, and it spatially rebuilds it so that I essentially am doing the same exact thing at a test array. So what I can do is take that workload over, point it at a similar storage config, and tell this thing to try that workload with every possible queue depth you can have. And it will come back and validate the data that Virtual Wisdom is recommending. So the ability to make changes in your SAN environment and be able to test them before you ever put them into production. Right? I want to know what's going to happen before I do it. And that is the best way to be able to identify that, being able to replay the workload identically and be able to do it easily. So the process to be able to do this takes you about 20 minutes. Whereas before Workload Wisdom, you've got to stand up a whole environment. I got to put a VM, load SQL, load the application, blah, 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 and then run my test, right? So yet again, another utilization. So 2 products that we have from the company, Workload Wisdom and Virtual Wisdom. So I kind of want to, that was a segue from workload testing, critical piece to any customer's environment. But really, the power to this platform really isn't, the fancy way we collect data. It's what we do with the information. So here is some executive dashboards that we deploy for customers. This is essentially a red, yellow, green type dashboard that a VPIT or really any of the guys on the infrastructure team can use.
Is this product just looking at the hypervisor layer, or is it also looking at the hardware layer in terms of the information it can provide you in the dashboard?
Yeah, I thought we might have to move to that sooner than later. No, that's okay because your brain works exactly like mine. The rest of the whole meeting is just going to be mishmash in your head unless we understand this, because it's the same way with me. So technical detail is that's our workload appliance. We're gathering data over IP from our switch layer and talking to the vCenter API. We talk to the IBM hypervisor. We talk to Microsoft Hyper-V via WMI. The storage metrics, whether it be NAS or Fiber Channel, we support both. Okay, we utilize a tap patch panel like I talked about that has the splitter in it. And so we split off a small piece of light. Now, what does that put us? So this is just a standard patch panel. And by the way, you don't have to buy it from me. You can buy it from CommScope. You can buy it from Corning. They sell taps also. We actually sold our IP to these places so that we're not the only person that's putting taps out. This is a standard product. It's fully supported by all the cable infrastructure vendors out there. So this isn't something, oh no, this is new and people are going to have a cow about it. This has been out for a long time. You'll see if you go to Corning's website and look up taps, they have all kinds of things about taps. In fact, Gigamon does a bunch of tapping also themselves. By the way, we're a partner with Gigamon because we can use output from the Gigamon for our NAS performance probe. So whether you're using NFS, SMB, Fiber Channel, we gather the data off of this tap. So this is the every IO type infrastructure. Now, I will tell you, the protocol is very rich. So I not only see what's going on here, I see all the way into the server virtual HBA. So do you have Cisco UCS? Do you have HP Virtual Connect? Those NPIV connections are very muddy. And unfortunately, the reporting on those blade chassis are terrible. So you really don't know if somebody's overtaking a connection coming out of that chassis, and if there's a bottleneck there or a bottleneck on your ISL. So we're able to actually see flags in the protocol right at the hardware probe to monitor that. And we see what his queue depth is. We see outstanding exchanges in the array. So very deep from that aspect. But then the virtual server is just, we're pulling metrics in straight from the hypervisor on that one.
So you can see what version your tools are at. You can see all that kind of good stuff in terms from a VM perspective. But I'm thinking also up to the hardware layer as well. Can I tell what version my firmware and BIOS is at? Can I report on that? Can I?
Well, it depends on the switch vendor. So Depending on the switch vendor, you know, your HBA firmware and your HBO BIOS is stored in there, and we do pull that information in. So if you're at the right firmware level, we do populate that information in the properties tab of every port. So you can get some information on the HBA. You can get so pretty detailed there from a storage perspective. We're not going to do it for NIC cards because we're not really gathering data from IP switches. We're not going to compete with a SolarWinds or some other IP vendor. You're going to use those guys. Because really, right, you can jack of all trades, master of what? I want to be master of storage infrastructure performance. That's any host, any storage, that's me. I'm the expert on that. I'm not going to try to be a Dynatrace. I'm never going to try and be a SolarWinds or, there's other network providers. You get what I'm saying. So that's the detail, right? And, a couple new announcements just came out. So we're friends with Gigamon now. So they allow us to tap a lot more stuff and use less probes because it like compiles data together, but it doesn't drop any frames. We also just announced something with Cisco. So if you're a Cisco shop, they now have a new module you can put in that will feed data, every I/O, about 10 metrics, straight to our analytics platform. So on stuff that isn't completely mission critical, we can pull data from there, pull it into our platform without having to use the hardware probe, where we're using this probe for the tier 0, tier 1 stuff, because we gather about 140 metrics on every conversation every second, just to get an idea of the depth of what it's pulling. Now, some new things that we're adding is we bought a company called Zengati not too long ago. And what we've really heard from our customers is, Mark, this is great. This is, number one, it's awesome. But unfortunately, from the management side, IT ops, IT managers, CIO, what they're having a problem with is like, this is great. Problem is I can't relate to my customers, because I can't map applications to the physical infrastructure. Who knows exactly what apps run on every server, every VM? Right? I'm still waiting. Right. And if it is, tomorrow somebody's going to change it, and guess what? Your spreadsheet's wrong. So that's one of the biggest things people are hitting us with. They're like, man, I want to relate to our application people, but I can't. So we bought a company called Zengati last year to get something called IP flow data. I'm getting all the data from the switch and to the host from the storage, but I don't know what servers are interacting with each other. And not DHCP, not, stupid little stuff. I mean, where are the app servers? What processes are running on the server, and what is the primary process getting all the process time? Well, if I could pull that down on every server and say, well, that's SQL, that's Oracle, that's a WAS server, that's a Tomcat. And then look at the IP flow data and say, okay, here's the application pod. Here's an application pod. And create app pods. I don't know what it is yet, but I know they're all talking to each other, so I know it's something. Now, what if you're using maybe something, maybe your ServiceNow customer? Well, we just wrote a module there to pull the CMDB down from ServiceNow, and they said, we'll let you do that as long as you audit our data and send a feedback loop to us. So we'll take their CMDB, populate the applications on this infrastructure, and then send a feedback loop when something doesn't match, where we find a relationship, it isn't there. So with those in case, and we wrote the ServiceNow interface in such a way via REST API that if you're not a ServiceNow customer and you got a CMDB, you can via Python just pull that down and import it into our system and still do the same feedback loop that we're going to be providing to anybody. So when we write something, we make it in such a way that, if you're not one of the 95%, you can still utilize the tool for that. Yes, our system will have a REST API that allows you access. So with that, right, now maybe this is going to make a little more sense. You could do that. But the other thing is this tiering. How do I know? So first off, I got to have my applications mapped before I can ever assign a tier to it. Now that I got the applications mapped, I can assign tier value. And the really cool thing about us is a CMDB only gives me a host and it says an app. But wait a minute. How am I going to alert on any piece of the infrastructure this tier 0 app touches? So I get a list of hosts, Okay, great, that's application XYZ. What the system does in VI is it looks at those hosts that map to that application, and if I assign tier 0 to it, it will spawn a discovery through the entire infrastructure, say this host, this VM, what pieces does it touch all the way down to the storage array, down to the LUN. And it marks every piece of that infrastructure with a tier 0 tag. And then it pre-populates and creates alerts around tier 0 so that when I get an alert, maybe a switch port goes down. If a tier 0 app touches it, all the red bells in the infrastructure go off because that is an important piece, even though that host really wasn't technically a part of it. So taking just a CMDB isn't good enough. Being able to map it to the infrastructure underlying and then assign alerts and analytics to be constantly monitoring it, that's what delivers this dashboard. Because otherwise, this is just eye candy. Yeah, it's a little work setting it up. But once you do that, and by the way, that's all automatic stuff now instead of you keying it in all the time. So now I can say, hey, how are my tier 0 applications performing? Where are my open cases, right? ESX VMs by lines of business. Who's the fastest? Who's the slowest? Who's creating most traffic? What are my major applications that I care about? What's their response time? That's maybe an executive level. Some of you are like, yeah, I'm kind of bored. Well, so we can also go a little deeper, do something like just a line of business, finance. Well, they're made up of a few different applications, but still being able to provide that view into it. And finally, a specific application. What parts of the infrastructure does it touch? What is the response time? And when I talk response time, remember, I'm talking end to end.
Can I do role-based permissions with this, giving the application team enough eyes to be able to look at their own app so they're not in my desk every day?
Absolutely. So like PayPal's a big customer of ours. Database guy upgrades his database. All of a sudden, he puts a ticket in the help desk. He says, hey, we have 500 millisecond response time. And then the guys look at it immediately. They're like, well, what happened at midnight? Because right before midnight, you were doing 32 KIOs. And after midnight, you were doing 512 KIOs. That storage, we didn't deploy for that. And they're like, oh, hold on. He made a configuration change, and it went right back to better. And he goes, by the way, can I have the access to that report? So now anytime they do an upgrade, they look at their own infrastructure report to make sure their IO profile didn't change. Because they actually don't know, right? The Oracle guy doesn't know Oracle updated some configuration files without telling him, right? He wants to be able to see it just as much as you. He wrote some SQL code. He has no idea how it's actually going to interface with the disk. I show a SQL guy, hey, you're pounding this disk array with 1 megabyte size IOs. You must be doing a full table scan every time. What's up with this app? He's like, oh, well, oops. They end up finding out, yeah, there's some bad code. But it ends up, I make it a lot easier for them to find because I tell them exactly what time it's occurred, what it looks like, and they're able to solve it a lot faster. Instead of just, a lot of times, right, we all say it's you, it's him, it's me. Well, if I can get all the data on the page and say, well, it's for sure this, we're not going to argue anymore, are we? So another view for IT ops, right? Let me be able to put in an application and see, okay, let me see all the infrastructure pieces of that application, and are there any alerts on any of it? So we have customers that utilize the platform this way. Anytime a war room comes up and they got application XYZ blowing up, they immediately go in here at the ops team level, not the storage guy. And they say, okay, who do we need to call? Is there storage errors or is there host errors? So they're very quickly be able to see that. They can see some of the performance data, see that it's right response time issues. So maybe it is a disk issue. And they're able to then run some dive in, show each VM on each ESX host. I don't know why I have trouble saying that today. So anyway, that's a way of being able to visualize the infrastructure and see where alerts and alarms are right now. Now, so case-based framework. I don't want an alert every time I trip a certain threshold, right? Because then what do? I make a folder and I just move all the emails into it and I never look at it. What if if I was going to send you an alert, but I only sent to you one time? So you best go look at my tool because I'm only going to send you it one time. You know, maybe every Friday I'll give you a list of stuff you haven't fixed yet this week. But you go in and you can see how many times the alarm has occurred. What does that do? It allows people to actually pay attention to the stuff instead of them getting ignored. Then, well, we have an interface to ServiceNow. So you can get email, you can send a trap, or send it to ServiceNow. Topology, so you can be in the alert, show the topology. What does this cover? Then I can go into Event Advisor, go find every time that event occurred, and then show a graph of it. And this one here actually ran Trend Matcher. So it was a problem where a storage port ran out of buffer credits. He ran the analytic. It went and found out that ESX03 sends a lot of data every time we run out of buffer credits. Well, guess where my problem probably is? ESX03. By the way, if you look at the topology, his HBA is only 2 gig and all the other ESX hosts are 8. And you never put in a cluster like that, so he doesn't have a 2 gig HBA in it. He's got some bad cable infrastructure and it couldn't connect at 8 gig. The examples I usually try and give are real examples, so that's why I'm kind of giving you a little background. QSolver would be another option to solve the issue, where we can look at every I/O going on, what the response time is at the different queue depths, and you can see here it's recommending a lower queue depth for this device based on performance, trending, and response time. So most megabytes a second at the slowest response time possible. That's what this analytic does. Now, here's what you're typically used to, right? This is a graph of some performance. I just did a drill in here. It's showing here 4 millisecond response time. Well, gee, that's all right. Who would want 4 millisecond response time all the time? So number one, that is the end-to-end round trip time. Most of your storage performance tools today, you know what they tell you? How fast it read it to the front end port. How does that help me? That just tells me if the disk array is slow. It doesn't tell me if I have an infrastructure issue. So what we monitor is both. We monitor how long the array took and the end-to-end so that I know exactly who do I got to go look at. The slowdowns in the array, go talk to storage guys. Slowdown network, well, gee, I need to get the group on. The other thing I want to point out is, yeah, 4 milliseconds, all right, but unfortunately, this is a histogram. So, I probably beat a dead horse. You're probably like, how many IOs do we capture? Every mark. But because of that, I can visualize what this line is. And you can see here, in this time frame, I had 6,000 IOs that were 1 to 4.5 seconds in time. So yeah, overall, it was 4 milliseconds. But guess who's complaining? Because I had a trouble ticket open on this. Some SQL guys. And they kept telling the storage guys, hey, I'm getting these alerts in Windows saying 4,000 millisecond response time. And they're like, well, the storage says it's 4 milliseconds. It's not me. Go away. Actually, well, he was wrong. The problem was in the storage array this particular time. And it was a configuration change we had to make. But once again, he didn't have it wasn't his fault. He thought it was okay. If that's all you got, what do you have to think? You gotta think it's fine. So it's no fault of our own. It's just our monitoring tools just don't gather the data we need. So this is my favorite. We just added this about a year ago. This is seasonal trend analytics. So all my VM guys are like, Mark, I got vRealize, blah, blah, blah. It's like, well, number one, vRealize is kind of a pain. I used to be a VM admin. Trying to find anything in there, unless you know exactly what you're looking at, it's kind of hard. What if you had something where you looked at all your clusters, boiled up all the bad stuff right away on the screen, and you just simply, oh, wow, yeah, I'm getting some latency here. I got a bunch of zombie VMs. I got a bunch of bully VMs. I got a bunch of VMs not really being accessed right. All without having to do any messing around. That's the beauty of our product, right? The other thing is I had a VMware guy, he's like, Mark, I don't want to set another alert. I'm sick of setting alerts. I don't know what number every number for every host, every application is always different, right? Can we relate? I got a backup workload, I got a workday workload, I have a batch workload. They all have different bad numbers. So it's impossible. What if I had a system that could set an alert at midnight, and before it set the alert, it looked at 6 weeks of prior data, looked at spatially how throughout the day in the next 24 hours that workload's going to look. And then if I deviated from the workload, so maybe it's got a batch workload at 2 a.m., I should get slammed with IOPS, right? Well, if I don't have any, probably an issue. I should get an alert on that. Or maybe in the morning, I get a lot of requests and response time goes south. But normally, it's really good. That is a change of behavior. Oh, am I out of time already? Man, I'm just getting warmed up. So, analytic on that. And that's some of the metrics. VM coordination we do, balance finder from an analytic perspective. Event advisor, this is my fisherman. I find something bad, it pattern matches to every metric in the system, doesn't care where the destination or the source is, and finds matches for me. So it makes me seem smart when I'm not. I can put a match in, it'll find the corollary for me. QDEP solver we talked about, and our workload wisdom, which we can always dive into deeper at a later time. But that's how I'm able to help customers reduce OpEx and reduce CapEx, by finding those ones that aren't getting hit, by seeing CPUs that are not being met, but having the metrics behind so folks believe me. Say, hey, look, we're running a CPU contention. Or, hey, this LUN for the last 30 days, it's only been hit like 4 times. Why is it deployed? Let's save that back. Oh, by the way, out of your 90 FA ports on your EMC box, you're only using 16 ever. So why is the rest of them plugged in? I had a customer, I could pull probably 400 or 500 port switches out of his environment after he bought our product. But he had to be willing to do the work, obviously, and change his habits. So we're a great troubleshooting tool, but we can really be leveraged to help bring CapEx and OpEx. And those guys always sniffing around, want to outsource everything. If I am really diligent about optimizing my infrastructure, they'll never be able to outsource you for the same cost. I got customers now that they get hit every 3 years. Guys come in, okay, let's see what it'll cost if we outsource this. Oh, nope, you run it way too lean, way too well. Just by the way. And that's really it. Here's some of our customers. Great way to get started is we do this as a service. So we have an infrastructure performance analysis that we come in, look at your environment, health check, health, utilization, performance, and provide data on it. We also have workload testing from that workload validation, bringing in a new array or several new array technologies. We come out and service, use your real workload, not some bogus workload that you create with some freeware tool. Real workload so you know exactly how it's going to perform when you go in production. Thank you for your time. Any questions? All right, awesome. So obviously we have a booth. Grab a card. We have a great local team here. Greg's one of them. He's I'm a technical guy out of Chicago. Greg's technical guy out of here in the, what area? Obviously Minneapolis, but around the area. So thank you very much. All right, the last guy did not get any claps.